This video is looking at factors affecting training programs. So the first thing that you need to be aware of is energy expenditure. And energy is measured in calories, and the number of calories used up or expended during exercise can be measured either directly, for example the heat generated, or indirectly via the oxygen consumed. It can also be estimated more roughly using heart rate. And there are several factors which can affect the number of calories we expend or use during activity. For example, how long the activity is, the intensity or how hard the activity is, the body composition of an individual, for example, overall mass and fat mass, and that ratio to lean mass. The bigger the person, obviously, the more energy is used and expended. And also the age of an individual as well, that can have an effect on energy expenditure. And finally, the climate, which is the reason why a lot of athletes use high altitude training or training in hot weather training, because they expend more energy and they get used to training at an intensity which is higher or harder than their normal training environment. Okay, so I'll just stop this video here because I can see that there's quite a few abbreviations that you may not be aware of. So TEE is total energy expenditure, and there was another graph before of TEI, which is total energy intake. So if I'll just play this video a little bit more. Okay, so data from this study shows the daily average total energy expenditure of all players, the rugby league players, was 5,377 calories across both weeks of the trial. There was no difference between the forwards and the backs. Total energy expenditure was significantly greater than the daily average total energy intake of 3,346 calories across all players. So as a coach and a trainer, I'd be very interested in that, because that shows they're burning more energy than they were taking in. And the resting metabolic rate, which is what RMR stands for, was 16.5% lower than values derived from commonly used equations, okay, using this study. So the main thing to get from this is an idea that rugby players use a lot of calories per day, and obviously from to maintain their energy levels and performance levels, their intake needs to match that. And then if they wanted to put on muscle, they would need to regularly have more than this in order to be able to build muscle. So this is a great study, something that you could use for your assignment, but it just gives you an idea of how total energy expenditure um, gives a performance coach an idea of how to structure a training program. So when you're looking at training program design, you need to think about different factors. For example, the more you understand about a particular sport and the individual or the team taking part in it, the better you're able to plan an appropriate training program. Okay, so there are different factors that you need to consider when planning a program. For example, the time, so the time commitments of the athlete. Injury prevention, so you need to factor in adequate rest and recovery time, and you also need to consider old injuries. Performance outcomes, so what the participant needs or expects from their performance, and also by when. So is it by a particular competition time? Is it just in time for the start of the season? All of that needs to be considered, whether it's pre-season or post-season. So pre-season, returning progressively to competition level. Post-season are restorative practice, lower intensity, make sure the body fully recovers from the intensity of the in-season work. What the management requires, for example, is it to develop a specific skill or to fulfill a specific role within the team. And also the individual athlete will have their own goals, but also does that fit in with the team goals and also the position goals? All of this needs to be taken into consideration. And then again, you would have come across the FIT principles. So the basic program design looks at frequency, so how often the training should be carried out. For example, cardiovascular training is 3 times a week, resistance training is twice a week, skills training 4 times a week, flexibility training is 3 times a week on average. Intensity, you look at how hard the activity is. Loads of ways to measure. This is using the RPE scale, the rate of perceived exertion scale out of 10. You could measure versus heart rate. If you're doing strength training, you can measure it as a percentage of 1 rep max or 1 RM. Loads of ways of measuring intensity. And time is how long the activity should last for, and it could be different for different types of training. And the type is the sort of activity or exercise, for example, cardiovascular, resistance, flexibility, or skill based. Okay, so how does that relate to your assignment? Well, again, the next part of your presentation template is the energy systems and expenditure of your sport. So I'm going to carry on using cricket as an example. So does it require aerobic and or anaerobic energy production? It's both primarily anaerobic. Okay, specific examples would be a bowler. So a bowler would be have their run up, then they would bowl a ball, then they would recover, and then they would have that maximum burst again. A batsman would probably stand, hit a ball, maybe run. So there's loads of time of recovery. So therefore, it's although you need a strong aerobic base, the actual performance element of cricket is anaerobic. So energy expenditure from a duration point of view, whether it's low, medium, and high, actually the duration of a cricket match is all day, unless it's T20. So it depends on the activity. If it's 20 overs a side, it's going to be low. If it's 1 day or more, then it can be medium and high. Intensity, I'd say it's medium intensity. A lot of people would argue with that. Obviously comparing it to something like cricket or rugby league, which is very high intensity. Cricket is low to medium. And I've given specific examples. The tackling in rugby league, the sprinting in rugby league. It's really high impact, high intensity type work. Whereas the energy expenditure in cricket does tend to be, in comparison, lower. So how do the energy requirements influence the design of the program? Okay, so this slide will help you consider that. So the time, discuss other time commitments and trying to maximize the time available for training. So, if someone is working, then you could look to, train them in the morning. You wouldn't give them a 2-hour training session. You could do real short, intense workouts to enable them to fit it around their time commitments. And it's important because you want to make sure that the athlete is consistent with their training, so they're working towards their goal. Okay, and you want to link it to your sport. So this is where you probably look at doing some research, finding out a typical training program for a cricketer, or and I'll try and upload some resources to Moodle to help you guys out. You could and then cite that as an example of a typical training program. Is it amateur or professional? It's both, and obviously a professional training program will be a lot more detailed than an amateur one. Injury prevention, you want to talk about balance of training versus recovery, and you're going to know that more about your sport. So for example, if you're designing a program based on someone competing in a league that's taking place over a series of months, you want to make sure that you're focusing on getting the body ready for that intensity, and this is where the why it's important factor to consider. You want to get them ready for the work that they're going to be doing during the season, so they're prepared, minimizing their risk of injury and maximizing their performance. And then again, here you go, typical injuries. Again, research the typical injuries. So footballers will have a lot of ligament damage around the knees. You want to make sure that the legs are strong, which is the reason why a lot of footballers' legs are quite strong, especially the quadriceps and also the hamstrings and glutes. And performance outcomes, so what a participant may want from their performance or sport, why it's important, so they can compete at the top level or to the best of their ability. And you could probably find out or research the key performance outcomes of an athlete in your chosen sport. Okay, pre or post season, what's the difference between the two, why it's important. Is there an on or off season? Well, for most sports there are, and then provide a detailed link to your sport. Manager requirements, how it influences the design. So a manager may want a cricketer to improve their speed. Okay, so they can run between wickets a lot quicker, and also possibly be a lot quicker in the field. Why is it important? Because obviously if you keep your manager happy, there's more chance of you being selected for a team. And again, I've given an example in terms of speed. Could be a requirement. It could be more agile in the field, so agility, and then you would have to link or put those sort of elements into your skill-based training sessions. And then personal, team or position goals, so how it influences the design of a program. So if you were going to talk about football, a training program for a goalkeeper would be different to a program for a centre forward or a winger, etc. And it's important to consider this because it helps that person maximize their performance in their chosen position. And then consider possible requirements. So again, if you're looking at football, you might want to look at the requirements of a goalkeeper versus a centre back versus a midfielder. If I was looking at cricket, I would look at the requirements of a fast bowler versus a batsman, okay, because those training programs would be very different. And then a final evaluation, this is kind of like a conclusion. Again, including a picture, how important is each aspect in planning training? Which aspect is most important in your opinion? And why do you say this? Give me some evidence and give me some examples. The more evidence you give me, the better it is. Make sure it's referenced, make sure you quote your sources. Okay, so hopefully with these videos, you would have seen that I've tried to give you as much guidance as possible as how to complete the presentation. I think the key is to know this, really know the sport that you are delivering, and go out there and do some research to get typical training programs for your sport, whether it's football, basketball, rugby, cricket, athletics. Okay, and then use those sources as examples. Okay, and then you should be fine.